Hello everyone, thank you for joining us. This is Steve Anderson with Work Camper News, and I really appreciate that you've joined us for this presentation, What You Don't Know Can Kill You and Your RV. And this is a presentation that is brought to you as a joint effort with Work Camper News and also Mobile RV Academy. And our presenter this evening will be Mr. Terry Cooper, the Texas RV professor, and we'll be turning this over to him in here just a few minutes. But I want to do a couple things just to make sure that we're all on board here. You should have a control panel that you see on your screen. It may even be reduced off to one side and requires that you click a little button to get it to open up. So as a little exercise to make sure that things are functioning well for us, because we want to, a little later on in the presentation, give you the opportunity to ask questions. And I'm going to be asking you some questions and asking for a response. So if you will, find the little illustration of a hand, and if you have found it, take your mouse and click on that, and I want to see how many of you have actually found that hand. And wow, the hands are popping up like you wouldn't believe. All right, thanks Dave and David and Debbie and Dennis and Doug. Eric, you found the hand, appreciate it. Harold's looking good, and James and Jeffrey. Man, we got lots of folks on from all over the country during this presentation. We're so thankful for that. Kevin, thanks for raising your hand. Christy, awesome. Martin, thank you very much. Wow. All right. Rob, glad to see so many of you. Now, what's going to happen is I'm going to lower everybody's hand now. So thanks for doing that. You'll see that they all go down. And as we ask questions a little later on, we'll ask you to raise those hands again. Just real quick, one little survey question I'd like to throw out there. How many of you right now already own an RV? Raise your hand. Wow, they are popping up all across the board here. That is awesome. That is awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. All right. A few of you that didn't raise your hand, this will be great information for you. It's going to be good information for all of you. Anyone who is thinking about buying an RV or owns an RV needs to understand what Mr. Cooper is going to be sharing with you as one of the key things, key components within an RV that can create many of your problems. So as we get into this, we're going to be asking you to be thinking about questions. We're going to go ahead and go through the presentation. Mr. Cooper is going to be presenting for you, and I'm going to ask you one favor. I know he's going to bring you a great presentation, and he's going to bring you value. And as you watch this presentation, I want you to be thinking about questions that you can either type them in right away or just write them down and think about them and present them a little later. We'll be doing some Q&A at the end of the presentation. And I ask for permission to do this. We're going to be sharing with you, after you've listened to Mr. Cooper, information about how you can learn more about what we do, because we want to help as many RVers out there learn as much as they can about their RV so that they can have a quality experience with that RV. So I will ask for permission a little bit later to share that information with you, and then we'll get into that Q&A, and we are going to have a good time during this presentation. So without any further ado, I'm going to lower everybody's hands, and again, thank you for raising those hands. We appreciate that, and would like to introduce to you Mr. Terry Cooper, the Texas RV professor, and he is going to be jumping into our topic as we get rolling here. Thank you, and take it away, Professor.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I appreciate it, and I want to welcome everyone to this event. This was kind of born out of a situation that we've had flare up. Many of you know that we've been working with RV inspectors and doing a lot with a lot of RV technicians, and also a lot of campground techs, and some things have come up, and a lot of dialogue took place. But here's the one thing I want you to remember. Because I'm going to paint a very dirty picture. I'm going to paint something that's kind of ugly, and I really kind of agonized over this before I put this together, of how to go about sharing with you some of the issues that we're seeing. But the one thing I need you to remember, the old 80-20 rule. 80% of the problems we have with these RVs are things that we can fix, that we can take care of, because they're easy to access, easy to fix. But the key to the whole thing is that somebody needs to show us how. You know, we didn't learn how to do things by ourselves. We had somebody coaching us. We were out riding a bicycle. Somebody had to show us. Somebody had to be with us and coach us. So that's the premise I want you to look at. That's how I want you to see this thing. Okay? Now, what you're looking at here is a motorhome. It happened to be, luckily there was nobody killed. The gentleman that owned this unit said he opened the door and the flame come out to greet him. And basically what the fire department says is that when he opened the door, it come out to get him because it was after the oxygen. This is what we're seeing, but there's some other things that are maybe not as quite as dramatic, and I'm going to show you in these next slides of what's really taken place, and we're doing it to ourselves and don't even realize that we're doing it. Some of us are dealing with issues at the pedestal. Now, and those of you that are relatively new to this industry, bear with me if I take a little time to talk about this, and those of you who've been with us in this industry before, you know, some of this is going to be, Cooper, I already know this, but you need to understand terminology, and we're going to do some things here to kind of lay some groundwork, because this is going to be as much education as it is anything else. Yes, Mr. Anderson's right. There's some things we want to show you, some opportunities that are there, but there's some education I need you to have. So this pedestal that you're looking at, this is the shore power. This is where the RVs get their power from. Now, the one that you're circled right here is a 50 amp, 240 volt power. So basically what we're doing is we're bringing 240 volts into the RV through the power cord, and then we split it and do some things with it. But what we're finding is a lot of the power cords are having issues because of either one, maybe we're pulling too much power, or maybe there's some problems at the campground. So these are some things I want to show you and make you aware of, because it's, you know, this is becoming life and death. When I really begin to start talking to folks and hearing some of the stories they're telling me, it really kind of rang my bell. So when I was talking to Mr. Anderson, I said, this is something I feel like it's time that we talk about. And let's just, you know, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Now, we're finding that a lot of power cords are the problem. So it may be the campground. There's no doubt about it. There's some times that maintenance is not being done on them, but sometimes it's we, the consumer, that are creating our own problems. Now, you're looking at a 30 amp power cord. Now, this is the power cord that we would see in a Class B or Class C motorhome, one of the smaller ones. You'd also see it on the travel trailer, some of those units. But this power cord, as you can look at this one, I mean, this was truly, these pictures are not something we just made up. These are photos of units, actual units have had some issues with them. And as you can look at the heat damage on that excessive amperage, in other words, we were pulling way too much power through this thing, and things begin to heat up. But you can also see there's some corrosion on it. So this thing has been around some moisture. Somebody's left it laying out in the water. And then we run into situations where people are out here when they're pulling their power cord up to get a hold of the end of it, and that's what they're pulling with. And so what they're doing is they're literally pulling the end off of the cord. Well, it's not hurting it. It can handle it if you only knew what was going on inside that power cord. And this is what's causing our issues, because this is what we're seeing. These photos were delivered to me by an RV technician, and he gave us permission to use these. And he said, Mr. Cooper, he said, the one on the left, he said, it's going to be a major rewire up into the walls. He said, I have got to build some junction boxes and tie things together. He said, because what's happened is these particular folks right here were using too many electric heaters, and so all the wiring in the panel box began to heat up. And so we talk about in some of our classes about how the neutral wire is the white wire. And when it begins to start getting heated, it starts turning tan, brown, and crispy. And when you start to see these things right here, you know, a wire that used to conduct power is not able to anymore because of one, it's charred or the connection's not good. But what we're finding is that many times people are overloading it, and this overloading is causing a stress on the wiring, and the stress then just turns into heat. And you can see the discoloration. You can see where the circuit breaker panel box is beginning to start warping and bending because of the excessive amount of heat. And the picture over here on the right, look at this one. I mean, the wiring, look at the terminal block. It's discolored. So what we have here is this was out of an RV. And not just last year or 2 years ago, just recently. So what you're seeing here is things that's taking place because of some of the cold winters we've been having, and how we are trying to save on propane, and what we're doing is we're using other appliances to supplement the heat, and it's causing us problems. Now, those of you that have sat in some of the classes that we have done, we always talk about circuit breakers, and talk about how these circuit breakers sometimes can trip, and they don't look like it, but they have. And then we also know that the warranty on these circuit breakers is trip for only one time. So the manufacturer, whether it's Square D or Siemens or whoever, says, hey, this circuit breaker is only guaranteed to trip one time. If we overload it, it's geared, it's made, it's designed to trip. But what I want you to see is look at the one on the left-hand side. Now, what we did is we peeled open a good circuit breaker so you could see what the contact points. This is how the power passes from those wiring that we were just looking at and goes into the RV to feed the air conditioners and the receptacles inside the RV and the ceiling fans and the microwaves and things like that. But look at the one on the right. I want you to notice how it's defective. Look at how the contacts are burnt. So if the contacts are charred and pitted like that, they're not making a good surface contact. So what happens is all of a sudden we've got wiring that's burning, and now we've got circuit breakers that begin to start giving it up, and this thing starts compounding on itself. But I want you to notice as well, what's happening here is that we've got, when I peeled open this circuit breaker, what happens is, look at how it flash burned on the inside of the cover. And so this flash burn shows us that something was taking place. There was heat, but also you know that thing had to be arcing in there. And so when you start to see this happening, you just say, okay, this thing is a disaster waiting to happen. So it looked just like that motorhome, or look just like those circuit breaker panel box we were just looking at a few moments ago. So we ask ourselves, what's causing this problem? Why am I putting myself at risk? I mean, I'm sleeping at night not realizing that this thing is cooking inside that circuit breaker panel box, or I'm gone someplace. I could very well come back and my coach would be burnt completely to the ground, and the fireman stand out there looking at it and say, well, it used to be a nice looking RV. So let's take a look at what's causing this. Now, we laugh. This little fellow right here is Mo the Wonder Weenie dog. He's the dog that the Coopers belong to. This is Mo's electric heater. Now, as far as I'm concerned, Mo, that's his heater for cold days, and we like Mo, so Mo gets his heater. But what we have begun to realize in our own life, we have 2 and even 3 of these electric heaters spaced periodically throughout our big old toy hauler that we live in. But this is the one back in the office. Mo was taking his little nap. So just imagine the power that we're pulling, not only for just the average things that are going on inside the RV, the electric heating element for the water heater, the microwave when Lady E's cooking, or the induction cooktop that she has, or the convection microwave that we have. And then you think about if we running the refrigerator, we have a house type refrigerator. All of those are running 120 volts. And then we're running that little fireplace. You know, that little fireplace generates quite a bit of heat, but it also pulls a great deal of power. And then you start adding these little heaters that we bought it down at the big box store and brought them home so that way the Wonder Weenie dog can stay warm, and of course keeps your feet from getting cold, because we're trying to save on propane, right? Because we don't want to pay for the propane, and most of us that stay in an RV park for an extended period of time, the electricity's figured into it. So we're saying, okay, I'm going to be very judicious with my money and make sure that I save it, but you know what? We've got to know what's going on. Because what's happening is we're operating way too many appliances at one time. Way too many. I mean, you think about if that 30 amp power cord, you got an air conditioner running, you got that little heater that could be running. Now, I'm looking at this air conditioner, and certain times of the year, if you've got a heat pump, it's basically an air conditioner that runs in reverse. And so the air conditioner running in the summertime is going to consume the same amount of electricity that the unit, when it's flipped over to heat pump, is going to consume. Same compressor, same fan. And so really when you think about it, if you're running that air conditioner in the heat pump mode and running these baseboard heat, or these basement heaters like this, and maybe using the cooking grill, and you know, we got to throw in a microwave, and oh by golly, you know, our missus has got you know, got to blow her hair and curl those little cues of hers. So that way, when you really start thinking about it, wow, how much power are we really using, and what's really going on inside that circuit breaker panel box? So, before we go any further, I want to make sure that we're all speaking the same language. Okay, now these are some of the things that we talk about in the classes that we do and some of the seminars we do. The first term that we need, if we're going to talk electrical, so those of you that are not familiar with electrical, this is as deep as it goes. This is not rocket science we're talking about here, okay? So just walk with me through this. Voltage. It's nothing more than the pressure, or it's the push that's applied to those electrons of the wire and the equipment. So voltage is push. Just like that fire truck over there and that pump that's running. You know, what it's doing is it's pressurizing, it's pushing. And that's what we're going to do, is we're going to be pushing these electrons. Now, these electrons are nothing more than a flow, and you put a batch of them together, we call it amperage or current, or you'll even hear people call it amps. So voltage is push, amperage is the flow. So think about it like a garden hose. You know, you got water coming out of the end. The bigger the hose, the bigger the flow. The smaller the hose, smaller the flow. Well, it's the same thing in the electrical world. The bigger the wire, the more flow, the more amps we can flow through it. The smaller the wire, the less flow we can do. And then we've got this thing called resistance, and I think we all are familiar with that. You can see that battery terminal, corrosion on the terminals over here. We're familiar with what's going on there. I mean, we've all had it happen in the car, you know. Corrosion gets between the battery terminal and the connection, and that corrosion is going to create some sort of restriction to the flow. It's going to impede it. So it says, I'm sorry, you know, we got a barrier here. Not all of you can get through, and then pretty soon none of you can get through. So voltage is pressure. It's the push on the electrons. Amperage is the flow, and resistance is going to be the restriction to that flow. Now, in our world, dealing with electrical, it could be the corrosion. It could be a loose wiring connection. It could be a connection, maybe we have some corrosion on it because maybe we've been down along the coast with a lot of salty air, or maybe some of us are using our RVs up north where we've got a lot of snow, and maybe we've had to drive through some really slushy weather, a lot of snow and slush on the ground, and so we've got ice and ice melt and salt. All of those things contributing to the electrical connections are the corrosion of those connections. All of those things add up, and so we have a really pretty hostile environment when you think about it. Now, there's another term, and this is the term I want us to really grasp, because this is going to be how we're going to compare things, okay? So that way, we've seen what can happen. We can see how the RV can burn. We can see how the circuit breaker panel boxes can burn. But if we begin to start looking and start going into an energy management mode and begin to start saying, wait a minute, we can't operate everything because we only have this much to work with. Well, once we start putting in that perspective, we'll see a lot of these issues go away for us. And we won't have to worry about this thing killing us or burning our coach to the ground, okay? The term we want to talk about, this measurement of power, is called wattage. It's called wattage. Now, wattage is nothing more than amount of work. It's stored work, stored energy, just like a water tower would have, okay? Because we know that a water tower, it's there to store water for the city municipality basically for 2 times each day. First thing in the morning when everybody gets up, and then when everybody comes home. It's watering the lawn, washing clothes, and getting dinner ready, taking showers, getting everybody ready to go to bed. Those are the 2 big times that we consume more water in the municipalities. So what do? During the non-peak times, they fill this water tank up, and it's storage water, and so it gravity feeds down into the water system. Well, that's what we're going to deal with here. It's stored energy, stored work, and that's what we've got when we start looking at wattage. Now, wattage is made up of a phrase called voltage, which we know to be what? Push, or the pressure of the electrons. And then times amperage, which is the flow. So if you take the voltage times the amperage, and I always tell everybody, cross your arms and look at, cross your arms about at your wrist, and look at the cross that you've got. Look at the very top. It looks like a V, and down at the bottom, it's got an A for amperage.
Hello everyone, this is Steve, and we've lost Mr. Cooper's volume audio for the moment. Not too sure, he's probably having some connections down in Texas, and hopefully we're going to be able to recapture that, and he can be with us. He may not be aware that he is not being heard. If you would, raise your hand if you can hear what I'm saying. All
Mr.
right.
Anderson, can you hear me now?
Yes, I'm glad you're back. We lost you there. I was just verifying with everybody that they were still on board with us. And
Oh, man.
yeah, glad you're back. So take it away.
Folks, I apologize. I actually even went out and searched out a very good internet connection. Well, so much for that, huh? So it's called Welcome to the RV Experience and Going with the Flow. So I hope that you guys were able to see the screen where we talked about voltage, amperage, resistance, and wattage. Now let's take a look at the electrical systems, the power that we've got. So basically here's a breakdown of what the typical RV panel box looks like. And basically what we're looking at here is power is going to come into a plug, that we're going to plug into the pedestal, either through a 30 amp 120 volt AC or through a 50 amp 240 volt AC plug. Bring in that power cord into the circuit breaker panel box. Now that's what we were looking at a while ago. This 120 volt VAC breaker panel box is what we were talking about. This is exactly where the damage is being done. Bringing it in, and then we split it out to the wall receptacles, the outlets, and then the lights, the appliances. Many times our problems being caused because of these outlets and what we're plugging into them. Or maybe we're plugging into some of the appliances and turning those on at the same time. And so what we're doing is we're putting more of a load on that breaker panel box than it's really designed to handle. Because you can't put out power that you don't have coming in. And so if we don't have the right amount of power, because one, we have the wrong power cord, we're trying to use a 30 amp power cord when it's really not designed to do what we're pushing it to do, or maybe we've got a bad connection. So those things really are driving this problem that we've been having lately. Now what's going to happen inside that circuit breaker panel box, we're going to take 120 volts of it, peel it off, and run it into the converter. Now that's going to charge our onboard batteries, because so much of our electrical stuff in there, the lights and the exhaust fans and the water pump, are being run off at 12 volts. The thing we want to focus on is from the converter back to the left, because that's where we're seeing a very large amount of heat damaged items. Now these are the power cords that are in typical RVs. Like I said, this top one, this 30 times 120 volts, the 3,600 watts. That's how much power that power cord has a capacity to operate with. So what we're saying is this is the power cord that you would see in a Class B, a Class C motorhome, travel trailers, and some smaller fifth wheels. Certainly in slide outs and pop-ups you would see a 30 amp power cord. Okay, now keep that in mind, that 3,600 watts, okay, because I'm going to show you a chart here in just a minute that's kind of put some things in perspective for us. Now drop down to the middle row here where we're looking at 12,000 watts. What we have here is we have two power legs. One is, if you can see in the picture here, one is the black wire, and that's going to give us 50 amps at 120 volts. And the red wire is going to give us 50 amps at 120 volts. And then the white wire is going to act as a return path for those electrons. Because these electrons, folks, are really just honeybees. They come out of the hive, they go do their thing, they bring the honey back to the hive. And so the same thing with these electrons. We're going to push them out on the wire, make them do something, but we've got to have them come back to their source, back to the generator, back to the pedestal, back to the inverter, so we can pump them back up and send them back out again. So what we're looking at on the 50 amp power cord, that is actually 240 volts, because it is not one, but it's two 120 volt wires, and those added together give us the 240. Now this 240 is the same 240 that we have in our brick and stick home. Dryers, electric ranges, electric water heaters all run off of 220 volts. Now some of us are maybe staying with someone and we're using an extension cord that we're plugging into. And this extension cords are typically a little bit lighter weight, and what we're typically seeing on those is 1,800 watts. So think about that. That's half of what that 30 amp is producing, because a lot of folks will take that 30 amp power cord and put a reducer on it, stick it onto an extension cord, run it across the yard, plug it in somebody's wall receptacle in their garage or something. Some kids that you're visiting, or friends that you've got. But you think that you're getting the full power that that power cord is designed for, but you're not, because that extension cord is choking it down. Okay, so keep this in mind. 3,600 watts for 30 amp, 12,000 watts for the 50 amp power cord, and we're only looking at 1,800 watts for the extension cord powered stuff. Okay, so let's take a look. Now here's a typical power consumption chart. Your air conditioners. Typically, an air conditioner is going to have a 20 amp circuit breaker, and it's a 120 volt device. So if you take that 120 and divide it by 20, we come up with 2,400 watts. Look at the electric space heater. Now this is like the space heater that Mo has. I flipped it over and got to looking at it. It's putting out 1,500 watts, 1,500 watts. That 1,500 watts is broken down to 120 volts times 12.5 amps. Now let me just tell you, the receptacles that we're plugged into, the circuit breaker for that receptacle is 15 amps. So I mean, we're just right below the threshold. But what we don't think about is, okay, we've got a receptacle maybe in the back of the RV, and maybe say on the other side of the wall or down in the kitchen somewhere or in the dining area, that wire may travel up there and feed a receptacle there. So both of those receptacles, or even more than those two, might feed off of one single circuit breaker that's only 15 amps. And so what we're trying to do is to operate a lot of these appliances off of one wire that's feeding off of one circuit breaker, that we are really taxing it and pushing it to do what it needs to do. Those of you that have heating elements in your water heater, this is about what you're looking at right here, 1,500 watts. These electric skillets, now I may call them a George Foreman grill or whatever, but look at them again. They're pulling 10, maybe even 15 amps on those. So look at 1,200 watts. Look at these microwaves that we've got hanging on the wall. Look at the wattage they're consuming. Hair dryers, curling irons. So when you begin to start thinking about it, let's put some things into perspective here. If you have a 30 amp power cord, that's all you have in your RV, then you have 3,600 watts. 120 volts times the 30 amps is 3,600 watts, right? Well, if you're running, let's say, the air conditioner, and then you decide to, okay, we're going to use the electric skillet, well, 2,400 plus the electric skillet is 1,200. That's 3,600 watts. Folks, we can't operate anything else because we are pushing the limit. So what happens is that this equipment starts, maybe we turn the air conditioner down a little bit, thinking, okay, we won't run it quite as hard. But what happens to us, though, is that we begin to start really stressing the wiring, heating it up. When we begin to heat that copper wire, what happens is the insulation that's around that wire begins to start burning, just like what we saw in those panel boxes a while ago. They start getting tan, brown, and then they get crispy. And folks, let me tell you, any discoloration is telling you that it's getting too hot. And so what's happening is we're breaking down the insulation value of that wiring. When you start breaking that down, that's when your problems really begin to start rapidly accelerating and causing you some problems. Now, even if you've got one of the 50 amp 240 volt power cords, which gives you 12,000 watts, these are big rigs, so we may have 2 or even 3 air conditioners on the roof. So if you took that 2,400 and multiplied it times 3, I mean, my, look what happens. And then you add in maybe the electric heat element for the water heater. Add in maybe cooking in the skillet in the kitchen and running the microwave. So pretty soon what happens is we're pushing the limit even for the big power cords, because we're pushing the capacity of what's feeding this whole operation. So we have to keep this in mind. We can't use the same mentality we had in our brick and stick houses, because there we typically had a larger capacity of power coming into our house. We don't have that in the RV. And this is what we're seeing over and over again. The conversations I've had with technicians and RV inspectors, the pictures I'm seeing from some of these RV inspection reports has been amazing, because that is a life safety issue. So what can we do? How can we protect ourselves? So what we got to look at here is I'm going to show you some things that you can do for yourself. Things that you and I can do to protect ourselves. We don't have to be victims. We can do things to keep an eye on things, okay? The first thing I'm going to encourage you to do is to buy you an energy management system. Now, here's the 2 brands that are on the market. They sell different levels of these. Now, they have some that all they do is surge protection. So if you take a spike on the line, say lightning strikes or something, it's kind of like one of those power strips for your computer. what you want to do is to upgrade and get into the one that does not only the surge protection, but you also need something that monitors the power coming from the pedestal. I mean, let's say that we had some bad connection inside that pedestal. Wiring inside there began to burn. This EMS system will pick up on it, and what it will do is it will disconnect your equipment. It will disconnect your RV, so that way it won't burn things up inside your RV. In today's world, an air conditioner is going to cost you about $1,200 to replace. And so when you start putting things in that perspective, spending $300, $350 for an EMS system is a cheap insurance policy. Now, these are what we call the portables. You plug them into the pedestal. I like these because you can plug them into the pedestal and it will tell you, looking back at the campground, what kind of condition the power is. Now, they also make these where they're built in, so basically they bring the power cord into the RV, cut the wire, put one of these in, and then come out of it and go up to the circuit breaker panel box. So you can get them either way. I hear some people say, well, you know, I'm afraid somebody's going to steal it. Well, trust me, they sell little locks that you can put on it. Lady E and I have been using one for 5 years now. Never had a problem with it. If there's been any issue at all, the outside elements got to the one on the right-hand side. I'm on fourth one right there because water got in. But, you know, we have been in some pretty tough rainstorms. But long and short of it, this is your first line of defense right here. Because if you're staying at a campground, let's say you're there in the cold winter or in the heat of the summer, and we're pulling, in that campground, we're pulling maximum amount of electricity. What will happen is the pressure, the push, the voltage that we're dealing with will start to decline. So the guy on the front end, the one that's right close to where the utilities come into the campground, he's getting great power. But you and me, we may be down in the very back of the campground, and the voltage that's being fed to us may be substandard. These units will see that and disconnect to protect your equipment. So this is your first line of defense right here, okay? Now, the next thing is you need to be able to get into your panel box. I want to show you this. This is something that we talk about in our classes. This is something I have all of the students do. And I can say without exception, in the last 3.5 years that we've done these classes, I have yet to have a class that someone, at least one of you folks, didn't have some sort of electrical problem in your panel box. And so this is one of the assignments. This is one of the hands-on labs that we do in the class because this is so critical. Well, it's the same thing for you and me. Okay, so maybe you're not in class, but here's what we do because you need to know this to protect yourself. Please don't put yourself in harm's way. Okay, you're going to want to take and unplug the power cord. You turn off the circuit breaker at the pedestal, unplug the power cord, and put a bag over it. Put a sign on it. You know, those of you who've been in industry, you know what lockout tagout is. What we're trying to do is to keep somebody thinking they're being the good Samaritan. They're going to come in and plug you back in, thinking they're doing you a favor. Well, you're going to be working inside the circuit breaker panel box. You don't need anybody to light that thing up for you. So you're going to bag it and tag it so that way no one comes along and plugs it in, because your next move is you're going to the circuit breaker panel box. Now you're going to remove the cover, okay, and you're going to access the wiring and all the circuit breakers. And these top two pictures, that's exactly what I've done. That's my hands right there that you're looking at. I've removed the cover off so you can get to it. Folks, we're only talking 3, maybe 4 screws to get in it. But remember, it's dead because you have already unhooked the power. Now, those of you that have inverters, you're going to need to turn those inverters off. And it'll be somewhere in your control panel. It's going to show you how to turn it off and how to shut it down. If you've been running generators, obviously that's a power source. You're going to turn it off. So you want to make sure this power circuit breaker panel box is dead, no power coming in, and you're going to begin to go in here and start tightening things up. Now, we're not talking playing gorilla and trying to break things, but what you're going to find on the circuit breakers, on the power strips, you know, what we call the strips where the terminal strips where the white wires and the ground wires all tie in, you'll be surprised how many times those strips have gotten worn. And what's happened is then when they start getting warm, that wire expands and causes that screw to back up. And then when the wire gets cold, it pulls away. So now you have a gap between the screw and the wire. And you're going to go in there and retighten these things. I share the story a lot of times in class where I was working at a hospital. I used to be the director of engineering at a big hospital in Waco, and we had one area in the hospital, it was an older part of the hospital, that we were required to take the panel cover off once a quarter. And we would come in with a thermal imaging gun and take a picture because we wanted to see what circuit breakers and what wiring connections were hot, because that would tell us what was going on. Now, we got into some situations where these connections, we were tightening them up time and time and time again, repeated offenders here. So we ended up having to replace a lot of the circuit breaker panel box. Big expense, but you know, our alternative was disaster, and we couldn't afford to have that. Neither can you. So you need to get in there and do some inspection. Now, in this bottom picture, this gentleman right here, he's one of our inspectors. He's doing quite well for himself. His name is Dave. Dave is doing the inspection on a panel box for an RV inspection he's got right here, because this is one of the things we ask the RV inspector to do, is to do a life safety test, because this is a serious thing, and they want to get inside that panel, take pictures of it. See, he's got his flashlight, he's looking at it, and he'll be able to write that up in a report. If he had some wiring that was loose, he's going to make a notation. He's not going to tighten it up. He's going to make a notation, because they're going to need to get somebody in there. Or if he's got wiring that he finds that's discolored, he's going to make a notation, so that way somebody will know. It's got to alert the people, hey, you've got a potential problem here. And this is what you and I have to do. We need to be getting into these panel boxes, and I'm going to say a minimum of one time a year. And if you've been into a situation where you've been pulling a lot of power, say like during the winter where we were using a lot of heaters, or in the summer where you're using a lot of air conditioners, folks, we're only talking maybe being in there 15 or 20 minutes, but it's amazing if you get inside that panel box what you will find and what you'll be able to fix and what you'll be able to remedy. And it doesn't cost you anything. You can do this yourself. You don't have to wait on some technician to come out there. You don't have to wait for 6 weeks to get into a shop. You can do this yourself. Now, here's what the typical circuit panels are going to look like. Now, this one we're looking at right here that has the little magnetic swivel cap, you know, the little light, what we're doing here is we're doing an inspection. Now, notice how the white wires and the bare copper ground wires are kept totally separate of each other. Okay, now this circuit breaker panel box, look where the white wire, it's a big heavy white wire, that's part of the power cord. Look at the red wire going into a circuit breaker. Look at the black wire going into a circuit breaker. And then there's a heavy ground wire. So what we've done here is we bring these wires in and we terminate them. You're going to want to tighten these screws up where all the white wires are. Look at all the ground wires, the green wires, tighten those up, and then check the black wires coming and that one red wire that are on the circuit breakers. Check those to make sure they're tight, because it is so critical that this be done right and be tight. Now, here's on the right-hand side, this is another circuit breaker panel box. This is another configuration. It's doing the exact same thing that the one on the left. It's just the one on the right came out of a big rig. I know this came out of a fifth wheel because I know the picture where it came from. Notice we've got a red wire and a black wire. That's where our two 120-volt power comes in and feeds into that circuit breaker. I want you to notice where all the black wires are coming off of the circuit breakers that the big ones are feeding, and it goes out to all of the appliances where we're going to tighten those wires. Notice that down here the bus bar where all the copper wires are, all the copper wires are together and all the neutrals are together. We keep these wires totally separate. We do not allow them to get together. I mean, that's one of the big things between us and a brick and stick house. Until just recently, you in a brick and stick home or light commercial, you were able to put the neutrals, the white wires and the ground wires on the same same strip, but we can't do that in the RV. We must keep them totally separate and keep them tight. Okay? So, I'm going to reiterate this, and the reason why I asked Mr. Anderson if we could talk about this at this event is because I knew how important it was, because I keep seeing these situations. And ladies, I want to speak to you directly. You can do this. You can do this if you'll just put a little steel in your backbone and say, hey, you know what? I don't have to pay anybody for this. I can do this myself. And that's what I want you to do. And gentlemen, it's time you get off your butt, get out of that chair, and quit watching television, get over here and get this thing taken care of. Because I don't want you to wake up dead. How's that? You need to make sure that you take care of your business. We're seeing way too many of these situations where we're coming into these RVs and we're burning the electrical panel boxes because we're operating things. We've got to know what our energy consumption is, and what our limits are. So with Mr. Anderson, with that being said, we can address any questions, or I'll let you take it from here, but I just want to reiterate to everyone, folks, this is how critical it is that we take care of our business, because it's so critical that we manage this electrical, because it is a matter of life safety for us, very much so.
All right, great job, Mr. Cooper. Thank you very much. And a very serious topic. I know it may sound like we're being a little dramatic, but people have lost their lives far too often because of the issues that Mr. Cooper is talking about here. And those of you out there that are listening to this, either you're an RVer now or you're thinking about becoming an RVer, we want you to know that you have some options. And that's why I asked you earlier, and I told you we were going to provide you with some good information, and I believe that's what Mr. Cooper's just done. This is just a little bit of flavor of some of the things that you need to know in order to be a confident RVer. And because we want you to be able to gain that confidence to be more of a master of your RV. You should not feel like you are a victim and it's almost in control of you. I've had a number of conversations with RVers who have told me that they just they doubt their ability to be able to take care of issues with their RV, so they don't have confidence. And when they have doubt, then the fear comes in. And then when the fear comes in, the anxiety comes in. And pretty soon what happens is they're not enjoying their RVing experience. And sometimes it even drives them away from the RVing experience. So the RV Tech course that we are going to visit with you about just briefly here is a program that we've been doing now for 3.5 years. We've had over 700 graduates of this program. And what it does is it provides you, first of all, the ability to develop a confidence. That confidence level to eliminate or eradicate the majority of that doubt that can cause that fear. It has also taken many of our graduates to the point where they are very confident to be able to help others, and that's one of the things that we are so excited to see is one RVer being open to provide care and to give service to others that are in need, because a very small portion of the RVing community out there has the knowledge that they should have to work with and utilize the equipment that they're living in. And then we've had now quite a few hundreds of folks who have gone through this program and then gone on to develop their own RV inspection businesses. And so what we're talking about, Mr. Cooper, if you'll click to the next slide, is we're talking about a program that is called the Training Triad. And this triad is a program that is taught in a number of different locations around the country, and it's made up of 3 components, which I really just kind of hit on in that previous slide. Number 1 is to become the master of your own RV. Number 2 is to be able to help others, and many of our folks have been able to literally put the information on their resume that I have taken this knowledge or taken this training and gained this knowledge, and I can provide your customers, Mr. Resort owner or Mr. Campground owner, with assistance if they're having issues. So they are hired as maintenance techs for that resort or for that campground. And then thirdly is to take the knowledge that you've developed and take that further step and get involved in the RV inspection business, which is a growing industry. Well, this course is, as I mentioned, taught in multiple locations, and it is made up of 5 different days of activities. And here you'll see the breakdown. Day 1 and 2, you'll notice Mr. Cooper spends 2 full days on RV electrical systems. What he just shared with you in about 30 minutes was just a light touch of the things that you will learn, but it was quality information that I believe after you've listened to it you understand that there was value there. But there is much more depth that you do need to understand, because electricity, both AC and DC, are key components in the operations of the systems of these RVs. So once you have the electrical background down in the first couple days, when we get into day 3, it gets into talking about propane and water systems, gets into training then on different RV appliances such as your refrigerator, your air conditioner, water heater, and so on. It's 5 very fully packed days, and I can tell you now after experiencing many of them that we have hundreds of graduates coming out of there who have said, you know, if Mr. Cooper could take someone with my knowledge level and take me to the point in 5 days where I am today, I wouldn't have thought it could happen. In fact, I was visiting with one of our graduates from the Freeport class, which ended last week, just this afternoon, and he says, if I can do this, anybody can do it, and now I have a confidence that I didn't have 2 weeks ago. And this is a gentleman who's just gotten into the RVing lifestyle, is now living it full-time and traveling full-time in his RV. This course is taught, as I mentioned, in multiple locations, and here's a list of the different locations. We have a course coming up next week in Canton, Texas. There'll be another one following in March in Texas, also in New Braunfels, and then you'll see that the class itinerary takes us out west. We move to Arizona, then up into California, Oregon, Colorado in May, back into the Midwest, Shipshewana, Indiana in June, Gettysburg after the big RV show in Hershey in September, here in Heber Springs around the rendezvous time in October, and then Caldwell, Texas will most likely be the last class of 2017. There still could possibly be one scheduled in December. And you'll notice that there are more classes that will be formed. We have individuals out there who are asking if we had a number of individuals that want to take this class in a given region, would you consider coming and presenting one of these classes there? And the answer is yes. If we can make it work, we will. And all you need to do is reach out to us, and we'll again though, we're gonna need to have 10 to 15 folks in that class in order to make it work for us to have a trainer there. Maybe at a minimum of 7, but somewhere in that vicinity. Now, the course has a tuition fee of $16.44. We've got a lot of folks who take advantage of the 3-pay, where they pay $5.94, 3 different months. We do ask that all the payments be made by the time you take the course live. And something that is brand new that we just were able to add for 2017 is a new option, and we've had some folks take advantage of this already. Through the PayPal company, you can literally finance this tuition, and if you have paid it off by the end of the 6 months, there will be no interest charge for it whatsoever. So it's like using their money at no cost. So that's the 3 different ways in which you can pay the tuition, and as our graduates would tell you, that it's dollars very well spent, especially with the knowledge that you're going to gain that's going to keep you out of those service bays at $140 an hour. This program includes a Rapid Start online training program, and this is provided to you through the National RV Inspectors Association. And what Rapid Start means is before you ever get to the class, you have the opportunity to go through an online training course, which is really going to give you a good foundation in everything from electrical to even getting into talking about some of the appliances. And then when you come to the live course, the hands-on course, it's going to give you a better understanding, and literally, as I heard many people say last week, it gave me a leg up in the understanding category. So as Mr. Cooper got into the different elements, especially the first day or 2, which is on electricity, as you're learning how to use a volt-ohm meter and measure current levels and looking for resistance and all of those different types of things, it gives you a good foundation in order to get into the hands-on type of activities that you're going to be involved in. Along with the Rapid Start online training program, you're going to have 1-year access to that program, and then as Work Camper News, you'll become a Work Camper News Gold member. We'll provide that for you because we do provide small business training, and that small business training is for the folks that would like to go on and develop a small business as either an RV mobile tech or getting involved in RV inspections. And that is a 1-year program. If you're already a Work Camper News member, we simply add another year onto your gold membership. Please understand, housing and camping and tools are not provided, and we do encourage you to come in an RV. Now, if you don't have an RV yet, that's going to be a little difficult, and the campground facilities where we hold these events have usually park models available for rent, or there are motels that are close by that would provide the housing for you. And if you don't have an RV to come, don't let that be a deterrent to not come, because there will be adequate RVs there that you'll be able to buddy up with someone else in order to learn and churn from. Okay? All right, so we want you to give that some consideration, and the Training Triad is just that. It's made up of those three key elements. And Mr. Cooper, since I've been talking away here, the old question board has just lit up here. Yeah. So that's a good thing. It really is. That means you've got their brain cells activated. All right. So
Wow, I'm amazed how big the crowd was.
yeah,
I mean, I was looking at the numbers a while ago. I just like popped my eyes out. I didn't realize, wow, that's a tremendous amount. So, and I look at what's with us. I mean, okay, I hope we have all night to take care of this.
All
okay.
right. Well, we're going to meticulously run down through here. Some of them are comments, not really questions. Don sharing that his first home that he owned in '68 had 100% aluminum wiring, and once per quarter he had to pull every plug and light switch to tighten those lugs because of what that aluminum would do. And I think it's a pretty safe bet they're not using aluminum wiring in RVs. Is that a good bet, Mr. Cooper?
Oh yes, that aluminum wiring. Run away, run away.
Right. Well, Don says thank you for the refresher. It was so in essence, Don, it was refreshing for you, so that's good. All right. So Suzanne had this, says we have a 30 amp class C. Anything negative about using a converter and hooking to 50 amp pedestals?
Suzanne, using it and hooking up to a 50 amp converter, or, a step down to go from where you plug it into 50 amps, hook your RV onto it, you're still only getting 30 amps. And it doesn't hurt. I mean, I know some people say, I'm going to get 50 amps. Well, you can't, because the wiring in your power cord and the circuit breakers inside your circuit breaker panel box will only allow that 30 amps to pass through. It's kind of like a cop standing there saying, no. Or I always tell everybody in class, just think about some bouncer at some big high-end club. He's only going to let so many people in because the fire marshal says no more than that. And that's what happens. So plugging into a 50 amp and using one of those adapters, the dog bone or whatever you want to call it, and stepping it down to 30, it's not going to hurt you. And as a matter of fact, I'd strongly recommend having one of those, because you're going to stay at a campground sometime where that's the only option you have to getting power. But just realize the maximum you're only going to be able to get into your RV is going to be that 30 amps.
All right, very good, very good. Here's a question that I know you've been asked a number of times. It says, when the 240 is split into two 120 lines, do the two lines remain 50 amp, or do each of these lines become just 25 amp?
Good question. Because of the diameter of the wire, each wire, the black wire and the red wire, can each handle 50 amps apiece. So what you're actually bringing into that thing is actually 100 amps. And that's how we get that 12,000 watts, because 120 times 100 gives us that 12,000. So good question, because and honestly, that's the reason why the manufacturers went to that style of power cord, because they knew the 30 just couldn't give us enough power, because more and more people wanted more and more options. And so yes, you do have two particular wires that each wire will handle 50 amps apiece.
All right, very, very good. All right, Jennifer says, would the battery disconnect switch shut down the charger converter to allow for the testing you were talking about?
With the disconnect switch, you have to realize now that disconnect switch is controlling the 12 volts, which is a totally different electrical system. Totally different. So just realize that every RV has 3 electrical systems, and that's what we dive into in class. We go through and look at each separate one of them. The 120 volts we're dealing with is going to have to be shut down at the pedestal, if that's what you're plugged into. If you're running the generator, you have to shut that generator down. And then some of you that have the bigger motorhomes are going to have an inverter, so you'll have to shut that down. So just realize that what the power we're looking at inside the circuit breaker panel box is the 120 volt stuff. The disconnect switch that you're talking about is a 12 volt source. So two separate systems right there.
I think from the many times I've heard you teach this, Mr. Cooper, I would say that's probably more of an eye-opener for students to have an understanding how important and involved the DC system is in these RVs. Most people, they don't deal with it in a sticks and bricks home, and so it's very, very important, and good input. All right, Raymond asked this question. Raymond says, you said to check for loose wires in the box and not tighten them during an inspection.
Okay. Yeah, let me clarify that. Okay. If you're working as an inspector, I mean, you're there to do the inspection and you're being paid for it, like this gentleman Dave was doing, we're not permitted to work on it, okay? If it's your unit or you're doing your own or doing it for one of your friends and it's not an inspection, yes, obviously you're going to want to take care of that. But just remember, we were talking two separate situations there. If you're looking at it, investigating it, and going to put it in an inspection report that you're going to turn over to a potential buyer, we are not permitted to work on it. We're not permitted to tighten it up. That is something that we document. So just keep that in mind. We were dealing with two separate situations.
All right, very good. All right, Janine says, she starts with 3,600 watts at any one time, question mark. Could one run 3,600 watts 24 hours per day and not have a problem?
That's what the wires are geared for. Now here's the thing we've got to keep in mind, Janine. There's some power being consumed inside that we don't always think about. Because when we looked at that diagram and said it showed that little converter, we're pulling off 120 volts right there, and we may be pulling 5 or 10 amps right there. So there's some hidden things back there. So yes, that power cord is designed to operate at 3,600. Just keep that in mind. Then that's in a perfect world. But what if you happen to have loose wiring in the panel box? What if you happen to have where that power cord is laying out there in the yard and the guy come by with a weed eater and slice that thing open? And we've had that happen, let me tell you. That's kind of nasty. Or in the pedestal, maybe the wiring in there is loose, or maybe there's some corrosion. So you can't always guarantee that you can get the full 3,600. But if you had the perfect world, had good clean connections, power cord's good, circuit breaker panel box, yes, it is designed to run at 3,600 watts. Yes.
All right, very good. Dale is asking, is there a device or a meter that tells us what wattage we are using?
There is a device that you see a lot of the guys that are involved in some of these solar configurations where they can put solar panels on your RV or even in your house. The only problem is they're so big. They're not big enough to handle what the RV is because the RV is so big. However, you remember that energy management system we were looking at, that EMS system, the one made by SurgeGuard or Progressive Industries? They actually have a little screen on there that tells you how much amperage you're pulling and how much voltage is coming in. So you just do the quick calculations, multiply those two together, voltage times amperage, and you'll know exactly how much wattage. So whether you do your calculations through wattage or you do your calculations through amperage, that little panel there at that EMS system will tell you what you need to know.
All right, very good. This is a question I could answer. It says, do you ever come to the Southeast? Well, here's the thing. Dallas, we were just there last week. We were in Freeport, Florida, and produced one of our Training Triad classes. Right now, the schedule that we showed you is for 2017. It doesn't mean that there cannot be additional classes scheduled. And the question will be is if you have a desire and have some other folks that have a desire, if we can get at least 7 to 10 students in an area, we can get another course set up in the Florida area in 2017 and get an instructor there to have it taught. But right now there are no other classes scheduled for Florida in 2017 at this time. Doesn't mean it couldn't change though. All right.
And that's the thing about it. We've actually put classes together because enough people got together, a little club got together. I'm trying to remember, we did a back-to-back one time up, I believe it was up in Shipshewana because of that. And we just had some groups got together and so, hey, this is doable. We do a lot of training for these rallies. We'll be doing some things for Redwood and Heartland this year. And so it's all based upon the need because we understand schedules the way they are, where we all live, so trying to make it work for everybody.
All right, Charles said, is there a discount for couples? There is a 10% discount, Charles, for the second individual. So yes, there is. And along with that, Jane is asking, can we use the PayPal discount for the level 2 course? And I know Jane just kind of blew everybody's mind that doesn't understand what the level 2 course is. The second level course, folks, what Jane is talking about is you've become certified through the NRVIA. You've come through the hands-on class, you've taken the certification exams, you're classified as a level 1 inspector. To go on and become a level 2 inspector, there is an advanced course, and that's what she's talking about. It's an additional week, and it is also taught usually in a location very close to where the 5-day hands-on training triad has been. And right now, Jane, we don't have that set up, but it's not to say that we couldn't. You could not use it with any other with discounts or anything in that line, but if we have enough demand for it, we could get that set up. So there's a possibility that, Jane, just reach out to us here at the office, and we'll see what we can do for you there.
Now, Jane, the gentleman that you saw in that picture that was looking at that bottom picture, he was looking at the circuit breaker panel box. His name was Dave. He is a level 2 inspector, so that's what he was doing. He was there on a job doing an inspection for somebody for pay. So you're right. He's already been through the advanced class. So what we've been looking at here today is the situation to where we would be looking at doing level 1 inspections. And so, like Mr. Anderson talked about, we have a lot of campgrounds that are asking for it. We have a lot of extended service agreement companies saying, hey, I need somebody to take a look at this thing and just verify the VIN number for me. So there's opportunity for you as a level 1, but if you want to go on to the level 2, like you said, there's some additional training.
All right, Jennifer asked about having another class, if there could be enough people available to take it. And yes, Jennifer, that is something that we can do. Again, we're gonna look for at least 7 individuals in order to make the class go. Scott, let's see, this is Sandy Scott, says, do attendees receive some sort of certification upon completion? Would you like to address that, Mr. Cooper?
Yes, indeed, you sure do. As a matter of fact, what we're finding is that certificate has opened a lot of doors. As a matter of fact, I talked to a young man today who's working for a dealership up in Washington State. And Dave, it's amazing. This guy had been driving a truck, and he told me, he said, Mr. Cooper, he said, I have got to get off the road. My family, I need to be home with them. And so he came through the program, and what I really noticed with him is it boosted his confidence. Probably was the biggest thing. So here's a guy who been to college, and he's a professional opera singer, and he was driving a truck. I mean, when he told me these things, I was kind of looking at him to see if he was going to smile when he's told me all these things, but he was on the level. Well, he's now working at this dealership, and he's only been there, I think, like 6 months, and now they've moved him up to where he's now going to be writing the service manual to do the pre-delivery inspections. Because he said, they pulled him aside and said, Dave, where did you get all this knowledge? He said, well, guys, I went to school. He said, I spent 5 days down there getting some training. He said, then I went ahead and took the advanced class. But he was so proud of himself. And he even went a step further and took another test with the RV Dealers Association, RV Inspection. And so now he's got his 2. But he got his foot in the door at that dealership because he had his certificate from NRVIA. Because I had the general manager call me, talk to me about him, and said, hey, tell me about this guy. He said, I took a second look at him because he had the paper, but I just need to know about him specifically. And so we had a conversation, and man, he told me, the general manager told me, he said, if you got any more like that, send them my way. Have I got a job for them? So yes, there is a certificate, and you will find that Mr. Anderson in Work Camper News, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Anderson, but don't you allow them to highlight in their situations wanted ads and so on that they are?
Absolutely, yes, and it does have an impact on employers seeing that certification, especially if they're looking for someone who has the capability to provide assistance for RV maintenance issues that their customers have.
Good.
All right, well, here's a voice from your past, Mr. Cooper. person by the name of Sky says, hello, Mr. Cooper. Met you and Lady E at Escapade some years ago. Great to have these webinars, and I thank you. I understand how to make sure I have no power flow with the shore power, but I also have solar. Where should I disconnect that feed so that I cannot get into so it can't get into my distribution panel to do these checks safely that you discussed?
Okay. Now, Sky, that solar is also 12 volts. So it's going to be coming in on the 12 volt side, the battery side. So just keep that in mind. The only thing that that you didn't mention here that I would want to make sure is that if you had an inverter. Now, an inverter takes battery voltage and makes 120 volt AC volts. So Sky, if you've got an inverter, there would be an on-off switch on that thing somewhere. And so that's really the only connection you'll have between your 120 volt circuit breaker panel and those solar panels is if you happen to have an inverter that's there. So if you'll turn that inverter off, you will kill that pathway so it won't get you when you're in that panel box.
All right, very good. Rob is asking questions if there's any way that you could have an advanced inspector course on the East Coast, further north in Florida. Rob, I do believe there is one. I know there's going to be one in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. It's going to be in September. Can't think of any others, Mr. Cooper, that are scheduled at this time.
And like Mr. Anderson said, if you folks will call us or send us an email and let us know, I'm looking for a class, what we can do is kind of keep a tally and keep track, because Lady E, my wife, tracks a lot of these things for us. And so that way we can kind of communicate back and forth with you. And so if we get a number, it only makes sense to do a class. So yes, but we just need to know where you folks are.
Kimberly is wanting to know what campground we're going to be in the Gettysburg, Pennsylvania course. It's going to be at the Artillery Ridge Campground, Kimberly. We were there last year for both the Training Triad, and then Howard Jarris followed us with the advanced course in that very same location. It's quite a historic area to be in. We were right across the highway and down just a little ways from one of the main battlefields, and just a very beautiful area to be in September. So the Artillery Ridge Campground. All right. Sylvia says, I'm attending the New Braunfels course and can't wait. That's fantastic, Sylvia. We'll see you in just a
March,
little while. Yeah,
it won't be long.
Jim says to thank you for the intro course. He appreciates it. And let's see, Donna wanted to know if there was discounted price for those who have attended the course in the past. And Donna, actually, if you have attended this course within the last year, there's a very great discount, because you can retake the course. You can audit the course. I guess that's the right terminology. For the first year, if we have space and we're near you and you want to come and sit in on the course and go through it again, you are very welcome to do that.
It's free. That's what we're trying to say.
That's what we're saying. That's what we're saying.
Now, we say that, but we need to go ahead and let Donna know we're going to ask her to help us. Because what happens is if you've already been through, it's kind of like having a big family. How you have older children need to look after the younger ones. Well, we have the same situation here. Well, if you've been in here before, I'm going to ask you to help some of the new ones that are there. Now, bring your existing books that you have, so that way you can reuse those. And you're going to bring your meters, and you're going to bring your manometers and some of your tools, but I'm going to ask you to help some of the others, because sometimes you may be out there in the field looking at something, and something you say and do might give that person an aha moment where they capture that knowledge that they need. And sometimes you might say it differently than I can, and you may say it in a way that they understand. And so we can use your support, and so that's why we open it up for 1 year. After you've taken the course, you get to come back for free, provided we have space. And that's all we ask, is just understand if the class is full, And Mr. Anderson, I think, if I think back at the classes we've had, I think we've had some we shoehorned in there. We were over and above the limit, but it worked out. So I'm sure we'll find a place to put you somewhere. Okay.
Yeah, they might have to hang from a rafter, but we'll find a place for them for sure. All right. Wendell says, or asks, can husband and wife take the course together with one fee? Wendell, if you have a partner who wants to take the course with you, there will be a tuition fee, but you will get a 10% discount off of that second person's fee. And Keith says, are there particular trailer manufacturers you would recommend because of their good qualities of the electrical systems?
Oh boy, Keith, that's what put me on the spot there. Can I dance on that one? Um, I, let me just say this. The internet does a fabulous job of telling us what's going on. And if you're looking for a specific model, Google it and see what they're saying there. And there's a lot of information because, you know, these things are built by humans, and humans have bad days, humans have problems in their life, and sometimes they do a good job one day and one another. But you're right, some are a little more prone to have issues, but if they're done right, they're built according to the specifications for the National Electrical Code. So we shouldn't be having problems. And honestly, folks, that's what drove this event we're having right here, is that I was seeing photos coming in from the inspectors. I was observing when I went to dealerships things that were happening. I've seen the reoccurring damage because it was consumer based. So, you know, as good as the unit was, even though it may have been a very expensive unit, as good as it was, if we misuse it and overload it, we'll damage it. And that's what I kept seeing over and over again.
All right, Diane asks I think a very good question. Can individual circuit breakers be replaced?
Yes, indeed. And here's the good thing about it. Most of these circuit breakers that we're looking at in these RVs, we can buy the replacement down at the big box stores, you know, like Lowe's, Home Depot, and those guys, and they're not that expensive. I mean, we're talking usually less than 20 bucks. So it's kind of like, hey, why in the world am I putting up with this thing? It keeps tripping because it's gotten weaker and weaker, when all I have to do is turn off the power and get inside that panel box, pull it out, put the new one in, and get it up and running. So yes, you certainly can. And that's one of the things we talk about in the class. As a matter of fact, we have you pull some circuit breakers out, because once you do it, you're not afraid of it anymore. It's like, you're telling me this is all there was, and that they would charge me how much an hour to do this? That's right, because we can do this stuff ourselves.
Here's a little blast from the past. Donald makes a statement, says, I'll never, and that's in capital letters, forget the $1,000 mistake.
Oh, Mr. Baker, yes indeed. Well, that's what we call the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And you had one of the bad, ugly ones there. Yes, you did.
But no one was hurt, and no animals were lost in the filming of that experience. So anyway, okay. Scott and Deb ask, what do I do if I can't find my breaker box?
Scott, it's there, I promise. And it's going to be somewhere. If it's a Class C, I'd look in places like underneath the bed, look in the kitchen, underneath the refrigerator, somewhere, you know, one of the panels. Some of them have a little cabinet door you open up, and there it is. Some, it's really strange. There was one particular brand for a while. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Cameo and Carriage products. There was a period of time where they were putting their circuit breaker panel box in the bathroom directly above the toilet. So you open this cabinet door, and lo and behold, there it is. So I promise you, it's in there. It's just, you know, it's kind of like, okay, if I was installing this thing and building this thing, where would I hide that circuit breaker panel box? And the key really a lot of times is to find the power cord and kind of feel your way up and say, okay, it's got to be over here somewhere. But yes, they're there. I worked with a gentleman down in Florida. We looked up underneath his bed, and he said, I can't find the panel box, and he had two little thumb latches. You kicked them back, and a little dummy panel fell out, and there was his circuit breaker panel boxes, but it was directly underneath their bed. So it will be somewhere, and they've got to have a place to bring all that wiring to. So keep that in mind. Electrical wiring came to that circuit breaker panel box because that's where they terminated everything. So it's going to be in a place where there's usually a wall, or there's going to be some space behind it where they can get to that wiring to hook it up. And besides, it's nearly always, I'm trying to think of any time that's not been this way, it's nearly always going to be inside the RV because they want to keep it from getting damaged, getting wet and with the elements. So it will be in there. I promise you. I really do.
All right, Mr. Cooper. Robert asks, when plugged into 50 amps and the power comes into the unit, how is the 240 volts split?
Okay. Robert, what they're looking at is that how they come up with 240 volts is you take a meter and you measure on the black wire and that red wire, those big heavy wires we were looking at earlier. And so what happens is 120 volts is coming in on the black wire and another 120 volts is coming in on the red wire. So basically we say it's 240, it's only because you're measuring between those two wires, but what happens is you really have two separate 120 volt wires coming into the panel box, and then they go off in different directions. The black one's going to handle a 50 amp circuit breaker and a whole bunch of 15 and 20 amp circuit breakers, what we call sub breakers. And then 50 amps, 120 volts is going to come in on the red wire, and it's going to come into the circuit, a 50 amp circuit breaker, and it's going to feed some sub breakers. So each one of those wires is bringing the 120, and that's how they split it out. It's because it's actually split from the utility company, not necessarily the RV. So what we do is we bring it in two wires and we just hook them up to different devices, and they go about their little business taking care of things there.
All right, Gary asks, would you recommend upgrading a 50 panel? This, I'm reading it as it's typed. A 50 panel, I'm assuming he means 50 amp panel, if you max out or come close to maxing it. If you TAT is 30, maybe if your total is 30, question mark. Gary, I'm not too sure.
Okay, so if he's got a, all right, I know where he's going with this. The 30 amp power source, there are some folks that can go in there and revamp and move some wires around and put you a 50 amp, but here's the deal. The wiring is coming to that circuit breaker panel box is buried in the walls. So even though you have a panel, you don't have any pathway to get it to the devices, because between the circuit breaker panel box and the devices like the microwave or the air conditioner, that wire's already in play. So if you're going to add that additional panel, I'm going to recommend that you have a qualified service tech or electrician do the wiring for you, because what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to run some additional wiring to different things. We see sometimes when someone decides to add an additional air conditioner, they will have to add a separate circuit breaker panel box just to run that new air conditioner. We see that quite a bit in a lot of the toy haulers. But just to pull out a 30 amp circuit breaker panel box and to put a 50 in its place, you're not gaining anything, because the wires coming off the back of it are the same, going to the same locations, and it's hard to, you can't put any more power through that wire than it already had coming through it. So it'd be a little tough to do. They can do an add-on, but like I say, please, take it to a qualified service center or an electrician to do it for you.
Here's a favorite one I know you discuss in class quite a bit. Can you hook up two 30 amp feeds to a 50 amp?
Okay, so I guess, can you hook up two 30 amp feeds? Okay. What you're looking at there, James, is that's what they call the splitter or the cheater box. And what they do is you pull in some older campground, and they have two pedestals. One has a 30 amp and the other has a 30 amp. And so what you do is you take this thing that looks like a big old octopus or squid or whatever you want to call it, and you plug into one 30 amp and then you plug the other one into the other 30 amp. Now think about what's happening. What you're doing is that one of the 30 amps is bringing in 30 amps on the black wire. The other 30 amps coming from the other pedestal is bringing in 30 amps, but it's coming on the red wire. So what you're really doing is you're only bringing in a total of 120 volts, 60 amps. So you're not feeding the same amount of amperage. And what we need to do, I wish I had you in class, because what we'll do is I'll lance one of those wires open and you can see how it's made and it'll make sense. But just understand, you think 30 plus 30 is going to give you 50, but just remember, what we're really getting on a 240 volt power is that we're actually getting two legs of a 50 amps at 120 volts. So you got on the black wire, you've got 50 amps at 120 volts, and on the red wire you got 50 amps at 120 volts. 50 amps on the black and 50 amps on the red gives you 100. When you plug into the 230s that you're talking about, you only get 30 plus 30, so it only gives you 60. It gives you a little bit better than a 30 amp, of course, but where did they get it? And the maximum they're going to be able to feed you is a total of 60 instead of the 100 that you would have had if you were running the big 50 amp 240 power cord.
All right, very good. Diane is wondering, where can I find the inverter switch to turn it off?
Okay, we don't know what type of rig you have, so that's always a big thing, but somewhere there's going to be a panel that the inverter is going to talk. The human has to have an interface, so there's going to be a switch, there's going to be some place that you could be able to hook up to. Let's say that you're in, let's say, like with these big Winnebagos or these big Tiffins. They actually have a panel there that you open up, and it's got a reading that tells you what's going on with that inverter, and it has an on-off switch, and you kill it right there, turn it off. Now, what if you have an RV that you just have an inverter that's running the residential, or what we call the house type refrigerator? So it's not very big. Well, many of those also have a remote panel, but some of them you've got to go find that inverter, and usually they'll bury it up in one of the cargo areas. You go find it, and there'll be an on-off switch there. So there's on every one of them. It's required by law. The National Electrical Codes are set up to where anytime you have a power source, you have to have what they call a disconnect. You're required by code to have some way to disconnect it. An on-off switch takes care of that. So there will be an on-off switch, and it may be that you've got to find your owner's manual and see what they say, or maybe call the manufacturer, but I promise you there'll be a disconnect somewhere, because you know, can you imagine if somebody got into that thing and started getting electrocuted? You know, that's not good. So we've got to be able to have some way to disconnect it, so that way we don't get hurt.
All righty. Some of these questions that we still have, you've kind of touched on, but I want to make sure that we address them since folks asked them. Deb asks the question, says, I have a Class C with 30 amp, but I have an adapter for 50 amp. Does that mean I now have 50 amps?
No, Deb, I hate to crush your bubble, but you only have 30 amp, because that's as big as your power cord is going to be. It's like, and I'm trying to think of how to describe this. What if you had a very large garden hose, and you hook it up to the faucet, and then on the end of that garden hose you go find you a little small one, those little green ones, where maybe the inside diameter is smaller than your little finger. Well, because you're hooking onto that big garden hose, you know, at some point there's going to be a restriction. It's not going to let any more water pass through. Well, it's the same thing here. Because you're plugged into 50, yeah, wow, we got a lot of power here. But unfortunately, the power cord of your RV and the circuit breaker inside that panel box is only going to allow 30 amps to pass through. That's the maximum it will allow. It's just said, hey, that circuit breaker says, I am built this way, I'm sorry, I can't give you any more than 30 amps. So having the adapter is good, because it gives you another option, because maybe you come into a campground that doesn't have a 30 amp service. You can use that adapter, but just understand when you plug into that adapter, that pigtail or dog leg or whatever term that they're using, when you plug into it, it's going to chop you down to where you're only going to be able to use 30 amps.
All right, very good. All right, Mike says, this summer we left our coach for a few days, and when we returned, we had lost our microwave, converter, and something else plugged into an outlet. We have since purchased a good EMS unit and tightened a burned wire in our panel. Could this have been caused by a spike from the pedestal?
Wow, Mike, here's the bad thing about electricity. It has some funny characteristics. You know, that stuff will travel down the line and everything will be fine, and all of a sudden it just hits something and then it ricochets. It could have been a spike from the pedestal, or it could have been that loose wire inside the panel box. And I've had that experience. Lady E woke me up one morning about 2:30 in the morning and woke me up and said, the kitchen's on fire. And let me just tell you, I don't care what your pajamas look like, you're getting out of bed. And I jumped out and run down to the kitchen, and sure enough, we did have a fire. It was the microwave. She left the light on, using it for a night light, done it many, many times. But what had happened was, as the air conditioner cycled on and off and some of the other equipment was working, we had a loose wire, a loose neutral, a loose white wire in the circuit breaker panel box. Once I got into it and realized what I had, I pulled on that wire and the screw was not even making contact with that wire. So whether the microwave caused it or that wire caused it or we had something come down the line, I don't know. All I know is that when it was all said and done, it cost us a computer, a converter, a microwave, a television, the vacuum cleaner. Luckily, we didn't lose any air conditioners. But so I'm telling you, you're right. You know, it could have been a spike to come down the pike, but it's like, who knows? Who knows? And if you've got a good extended service agreement policy, a lot of times they'll step up to the plate and help you. Or if you have a good insurance policy on your rig, a lot of times they'll help you take care of it.
All right, Professor Janine is asking, do appliances draw any power just being plugged in even though they're not being used?
Yes, they do. In today's world, we have a lot of circuitry inside those units that are keeping everything warmed up. You know, think about your television. When you hit that remote control, that television was alive, or otherwise it wouldn't have responded to that remote control. Stereo systems do the same thing. Think about these microwaves. I mean, the little clock, you don't think it's much power, but it's a little bit. And that's what we call that little drain, we call that parasitic load. In other words, it's there sucking away, just like little parasites, drawing off, drawing off. And yes, even though you're saying, well, I'm not using it, but it is, sometimes it's monitoring. It's kind of like your cell phone. You know how you have that little power cord that you plug into the wall receptacle? Even though you're not plugged into it, it's still pulling power. And so keep that in mind. You know, some things, particularly if you're going to go on a trip, sometimes it's not a bad thing. Just unplug them so that way you lessen the possibility of having any issues.
All right, Dale just wanted to say, Professor, really enjoy the seminars. Thank you. And Michael kind of reiterated the question, wouldn't the battery disconnect work to kill the inverter too? And there's a few other questions about how do I kill the converter. So maybe one more time on the inverter and the converter, and we'll hit quite a few birds here.
Two separate instruments here. The converter starts with a C. It's a charger. It's a battery charger is what it really is. It's a fancy battery charger. It puts out a lot more power than the battery charger we hook up to our batteries underneath the hood to get it jump started. So a converter is going to take 120 volts and make 12 volts to feed the battery. Okay, so you can disconnect that unit. It's here again because it's an electrical device. The National Electrical Code requires every device to be able to be disconnected. So some manufacturers have a plug on the end of that converter, and you just literally unplug it. Others of them, they have a circuit breaker that you turn it off, and that will kill power to the converter. Now, the inverter does right the opposite of a charger. It's going to take battery power and it's going to invert it and change it into 120 volts to run some things. Now, here's the screwball thing about it. Depending on how the manufacturer hooked that inverter up, you may be able to disconnect it with a disconnect switch. So basically, the disconnect switch is a switch that's hooked up to the batteries coming off of them. Some of them, if you turn it off, it kills everything that battery feeds, but not always. And that's the thing. You got to know what yours is, how it's wired. Different brands do it different ways. So I'd rather err on the cautious side and just turn the inverter off so that way you know beyond a shadow of a doubt if you turn off the inverter, you have now killed any potential to develop 120 volts inside that electrical circuit breaker panel box.
Very good. Well, George says, I've noticed over the years that a lot of people at campgrounds don't turn off the breaker at the pedestal before plugging in or unplugging. What is your suggestion?
George, you know, you and I have got to be missionaries on this thing. We have got to go preach the gospel, because I'm here to tell you, I am totally amazed when we pull into a campground, and it sounded like you've done the same thing, just kind of scratch your head when you raise the lid at that pedestal and the circuit breakers are turned on. And the question always goes through my mind, okay, we know the converter was pulling power because it was already hooked up, but did they have the air conditioners on? Did they have any heaters on? So when they went to unplug from that pedestal, was that a hot pull? Now think about what George is talking about here. if you were to go to pull that plug out of that receptacle, those connections are making and making and making, and then all of a sudden when that plug starts to disconnect, there's going to be a little bit of gap. And what's going to happen is that electricity is going to jump and try to arc across. And what it's going to do is it's going to create spikes up the power line to our equipment, but it also is going to create pitting and scratching and chipping. I mean, just big old nasty pits on the end of our power cord. Imagine what's going on inside the receptacle. So that's why when you go to disconnect, you know, everything, air conditioners to be turned off, all the appliances that you can turn off, turn them off, and then turn off the circuit breakers. Now some campgrounds, they just go Ebola on you, but it's like, you know what? That's safety. Because I don't know about you, I've put my hands around some of those plugs, and I'm wondering how in the world am I going to keep my fingers from accidentally touching those blades that are going inside that receptacle when I start to pull it out. So by turning off that circuit breaker, that, as far as I'm concerned, that's about as life safety as we need to get, because we need to take care of the human, which is you and me. So yes, George, I'm with you 100%. Turn off that circuit breaker. Before you do, though, make sure everything's turned off inside your rig so you can save your equipment, because, you know, if you don't look after your safety, nobody else is.
All right, Professor, thanks for hanging in there. We've still got a few questions to go, and I know we're about an hour and a half into this, but the folks are hanging in there, and they really appreciate the input you're providing them. So next question from Stephanie is asking, how large of a generator do we need to have to use a 15,000 BTU AC unit and standard appliances in a 2017 Forest River travel trailer?
Oh, let's see here. Stephanie, I wish I knew what size power cord you had. That would help us a lot right there. I'll tell you what let's do. Let's run some numbers here, okay? A 15,000 BTU air conditioner is going to have a 20 amp circuit breaker. That's industry standard, okay? So you know that you're already at 2,400 watts, right? And then you're going to want to run some other appliances and stuff. If you've only got a 30 amp power cord, it doesn't matter how big a generator we've got. That power cord's going to choke down and only allow us to have the 3,600. Now, what if you happen to, please excuse me, I don't remember what Forest River is doing in their Vibe, because some of their units, some of the travel trailers they have actually have 50 amp power cords. So I don't remember off the top of my head whether or not the Vibe has a 50 amp power cord. Now, a 50 amp power cord has the capability of, remember how many watts we talked about? 12,000 watts. Now, here's the thing about it. They make a 12,000 watt generator, but that is going to be one heavy mama jama. Let me tell you, that's what they put in these big motorhomes. Mr. Anderson, how big a generator do you have in Miss Ellie, your big ellipse?
10,000 watt.
Okay, so he's got a 10,000 watt, and I know he's got a 50 amp power cord. So what happens is that when he switches over to generator, he's not going to be able to operate everything that he normally would operate if he was, you know, plugged in shore power that gives him 12,000 watts, because the generator is only giving him 10. So what's going to happen to you guys, Stephanie, is that if you've got a 30 amp, you know, you're gonna be lucky. Probably the generator that you're going to want to buy is probably going to be something between a 3,600 and a 4,000 watt generator. Onan makes them, Honda makes them, Yamaha makes them. Okay, so you know, get you up to the wattage that you need. But what if you have a 50 amp power cord? Now it's going to be dependent on how big a pocketbook you have and how big a vehicle can you transport this thing in. So you and your partners are going to have to make a decision, how big a generator can we run. But just understand, the chances are you're not going to be able to run everything unless you're willing to pony up and put a 12,000 watt generator in it. And I will tell you, when you buy that generator, you'll know it, because we're talking several $1,000s to buy that thing. So just keep that in mind. Everything is going to be gauged off of the power cord, and everything's going to be gauged off of what appliances do you want to operate. And so that's why I say a little homework, and I can already see where you're going here. I'm encouraged to see that you're already thinking about it, and I'm going to ask you to do some serious calculations. How many, you got one air conditioner? Are you going to run the microwave? You know, are we going to be running curling irons and things like that? that's going to drive what you're going to be capable of doing at one time. It may be that you may have to say, okay folks, it's air conditioner time, but we can only operate this, and you're just going to go into energy conservation mode.
All right. This is kind of an interesting, I think it's kind of a statement, Mr. Cooper, from Edwin. He says, I found if I have my truck Freightliner FL50 plugged into the fifth wheel and the power disconnect turned off, I have power from the truck keeping the trailer alive.
Wow. I found if I have my truck Freightliner plugged into the fifth wheel and the power disconnect turned off, I have power from the... How do they have that thing wired?
Interestingly.
Yeah. Edwin, I would love to sit around across from me at a campfire. You'd be an interesting individual to talk to. I can already see where you're at. So I hope our paths cross. If they do, please walk up and let's talk about this, because I'd like to know what happened, because, man, that could have some potential to light somebody up. And how did you find out about this? You know, I hope you didn't find it out the hard way.
Yeah, agreed. Benita's asking, do we get a list of tools to bring to the class?
Absolutely. That's one of the very first things that happens. There'll be an automatic email go out to you. There'll be certain things that, you know, you're going to need to bring, a volt amp meter, and we're going to show you, hey, there's different brands that you can buy if you don't have one that'll do, you know, if you don't have it in your toolbox already. A manometer, which you check for propane leaks, because folks, that's another thing, another life safety thing we get into. And the other tools, they're kind of basic for this first class. I mean, we're talking screwdrivers, pliers, crescent wrenches, you know, very, very basic stuff. Most people already have that stuff. So most folks, we tell them for your first class, if you spend $150 for tools, you know, you probably push the limits. And all this stuff you can order off of Amazon. So that's the good thing about it. So it's not, you know, the amp clamp may be $60, the manometer may be $50. So, you know, and then a polarity tester that has a GFCI function I think is like $14 on Amazon. So we're not talking a tremendous amount of dollars here.
All right, quite a few thank yous from folks, Mr. Cooper. And then Tim has kind of an interesting one, reminds me of a story that you tell during the training. It says, we have a new unit with a 30 amp, and when you are running the fireplace and turn on the microwave, it shuts off the fireplace. Is this a safety issue? It doesn't kick the breaker, just turns the fireplace off.
Well, let's see here. You didn't say what brand it is, but I'd venture to say you probably have one of those that has a built-in energy management system. And what they're doing is, this thing is smart, and it figures out real quick you're fixing to exceed its capacity, and so it has the ability to disconnect certain devices. If you had two air conditioners on this thing, you would actually, it would be doing the same thing where it would turn off one air conditioner and let the other one run, and then when temperature got down in that one area, it would turn that one off and turn on the other. So we call that load shedding. So sound like your system here is a smart unit. So you definitely don't have a low-end unit. I can tell just by the way you're describing this, it's not a low-end cheapy. So it probably has a load shed system, and it's built in to do that, because that's what they're trying to do, is help you maximize your use of your 30 amps. So be kind of curious to see what brand he's got there, because whether you realize or not, he bought a good one, because that's a nice feature to have.
All right. Ken is asking, is there a refresher course offered? And I think we kind of hit on that, Ken. If you've taken the class within the last year, you can come in and actually attend the course again, as long as there's room in the class. And that offer is good for up to 1 year. And after that, you would need to come and take the class again if you wanted to, just as if you were a new student. Let's see, another question kind of along fees here. Michael says, what's the cost of the level 2 course? Actually, Greg's asking the same question. The level 2 course is $1145. It's a 5-day course, and as a benefit to our in-class hands-on students, on the 5th day at graduation time, we make you a special offer where we give you a 10% discount off of that to our 5-day hands-on folks. So it's $1145. The folks that want to travel on from the hands-on course, it ends up being $1,030. All right. Okay. Here's an interesting one from Karen, Mr. Cooper. How much should I pay for an inspection from one of your graduates?
Karen, that's really driven by them. I can give you some, ballpark, but that's really all I can do. I'm hearing somewhere on the travel trailers and those that maybe have like a 30 amp, I'm hearing anywhere from $400 or $500, maybe $600. I'm hearing on the, excuse me, on the big motorhomes, I'm hearing numbers based on what's being done if they're going to do fluid analysis, because that's something we haven't talked about. But if you're buying a unit that has an engine, even has a generator, if you're buying used and you don't know the history on it, you don't have the service records on it, and so you really know that what's gone through, we recommend that you have a fluid analysis done, and these inspectors are doing that. And so I have seen some of these big motorhomes that had the fluid analysis, a full-fledged inspection, some of these big diesel pushers. I've seen them up around about $1,200–$1,400, but you're talking about a $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 unit. So when you look at it on that end of the spectrum, that's not bad, because they're throwing in the fluid analysis as well. So, you'd want to know what's the condition of the engine oil, what's the condition of the transmission fluid, the coolant, the generator. And if you've got a generator like one of these big 10 or 12,000 watt generators, it's going to have a radiator built on it, so you're going to get the coolant there. Now, here's something to keep in mind. Here's the stat that we've come into this last year, as a matter of fact. We track this to see. Last year, over 32% of the motorized units, this is like motorhomes, that we pulled oil samples on, over 32% had some sort of engine issue. Isn't that amazing? So when they pulled the oil samples, something flashed up. Now, Tom Johnson with the lubrication guys, the ones that does all of our lab work for us, sent me the stats, and we were talking about it. He said, now, Cooper, some of these may be the injectors are hanging up, we're spraying too much fuel, and it's diluting the oil, which is a bad thing. But that can be corrected fairly easy, because it may just need to be cleaned. But he said, let me just tell you, you've got some units out there that people are looking about buying. We're finding piston material, bearing material, things coming apart inside these engines, and a lot of times even the seller doesn't know it. So that fluid analysis is like a blood test, and it's going to tell you everything that you need to know. So depending on what you're trying to buy, Karen, depending on the history of this unit, don't take any chances. Sometimes it's better to walk away from one than buy a money pit. And so we go into that quite a bit in the classes. And let me just tell you, the advanced class is coming. Now, if you're thinking about even buying a unit, why not do this on your own? Take these classes and learn what you're looking for. So even if you just took the level 1 class, you'd have a better eye for what you're looking for, and you'd get out of the emotional realm and see it for what it really is. So Karen, I'm going to encourage you, if you haven't bought yet, do like several folks we've had come through our class. Come and learn, so that way you don't get Google-eyed over the curtains or the floor plan, okay? And I promise you, it'll be the best money you spend, because you will keep from buying a money pit. We've seen it way too many times.
All right, couple questions, different folks asking about, will they get a written certificate when they finish the level 1 certification process? And yes to that. And George wanting to know, what are the work opportunities available to level 1 technicians versus a level 2 technician?
Boy, that's the million-dollar question. Obviously, a level 2 technician can do level 1 work as well, so obviously you've got more opportunities. Level 1, we're seeing right now, most of you guys are doing, like I said, extended service agreement work. There are some banks and lending institutions that want somebody to go put eyeballs on it, and they call it collateral verification. So we see that. We have some folks that are also working with clients. Now, this is something that might appeal to some of you folks, is that wouldn't it be cool if there was somebody that could walk you through how your RV works when you buy it? I mean, whether you buy it at a dealership or you buy it from an individual, wouldn't it be cool to have somebody say, hey, here's how this works, and let you put your finger on the button and let you operate it? Wouldn't it be cool to have somebody do the walkthrough with you? And that's what level 1s are doing, because when you get into that level 1, you're seeing what's going on. Now level 2, here again you spend a lot more time crawling around that thing. You fill out the software, you're doing reports. I mean, you're going to do some sample reports. So I will tell you, level 1's a good way to go. It's a good way to get your foot get your toe in the water and just check it out and see if you want to go any further. If you can, if you really want to do this, and maybe do this if you maybe travel across the country, go ahead and pony up and do the level 2, so that way you can do both, either or. Okay, so just keep that in mind. You just have more opportunities as level 2s.
All right, very good, very good. A lot of the questions I'm running into you've already covered. Here's one from Brad. It says, providing more information. A typical hair dryer nowadays is 1875 watts. Need to look for a hair dryer that is rated at a lower wattage for the RV. Something. Oh, okay. This is from Brad, the master electrician. Okay. All right.
Guys, did you hear what he just said? He's right on the money. We go down here and we go to Sally's Beauty Supply or wherever and buy these things. We don't even look at the package, and we go home and we plug it into that receptacle. And that receptacle is a 15 amp receptacle. So what do we know that 15 amps gives us? If we take 15 amps times 120 volts, that's what? 1800? So what Brad's saying, he's nailing this thing. You're already overwatted. And so what's going to happen is you're going to try to operate this thing and it's not going to function like you need. So he's right. Think about this. If you're buying these, you got to turn that thing over and look at it and say, okay, I only have this much coming out of that receptacle, 1800 watts maximum, and that's if nothing else is operating. So if you buy those that are 1875, you're wasting your money because it's not going to be able to give you. You're not going to be able to operate on that high range. You may have to back it off and maybe only run half or maybe 3/4. So keep that in mind. Good point, Brad. Very good point.
James wanted to share, thank you for taking the time to visit with us about this. And he has a question. It says, I have a 30 amp system with a Progressive Industries EMS system. Sometimes when I plug it in, it'll give me an error code for hertz. It then resets and everything is fine.
It's kind of like a computer. Sometimes you got to turn that thing off and reboot it, isn't it? Because if you ever take the cover off one of those, it really is. It's a circuit board in there. So what it is it gets confused. I've had it happen where I plugged into a pedestal and it was bad, had some problems with it, unplugged it, went to the next one, and it was telling me that pedestal's bad. And what I had to do is to pull it out and let it set for a few minutes and then plug it back in. It was good. Basically rebooted it. So so I gave you an error code for hertz, huh? Yeah, sometimes you got to reboot them. You're right.
All right, Dallas is wanting to know, what would be a ballpark figure that we would need to spend on tools prior to a course?
Dallas, if you're doing a level 1, and I'm going to say $150. Okay, if you're doing level 2, because when you're doing level 2, you're also buying the tools that you're probably going to be doing your inspection. So here we're talking about a ladder, because you're going to have and I will tell you the favorite in the industry right now is the Little Giant because of the capability it has. So you're spending a few dollars for that, and so the basic tools. So you can get as wild and crazy as you want. You can go down to Sears and buy them, go to Home Depot and buy some good quality, or go to Lowe's and buy good quality, or you can go to one of those places that bring stuff in from China. As we all know, you get what you pay for. So I'm just going to say for level 1, $150. The level 2, I'm hearing guys saying that they're spending $300, $400, maybe $500 if they didn't have anything, but most of you guys already have most tools already. And here's the crazy thing, pawn shops. Man, I've been amazed at the quality of tools sometimes you get from these pawn shops.
All right, a little note from our buddy Mr. Matthews is asking, he says, will you and the professor be staying over for the advanced course at Canton? I'm referring to the one after the Training Triad. And I can say, Mr. Matthews, sorry, we won't be. We actually have a date at the Dallas RV show, and so we'll be down there, I believe.
However, we will be parked in the same park, won't we?
That's right. We are staying there. So yes, we will. We will be dragging in there after hours each evening. That's true. That's for sure. All right, lots of thank yous, and Kevin wanted to share. Great to hear from you guys again. Thank you for all
Ah,
the great info.
Hee Hee Ahi guy, remember him?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Salem, Oregon, sure
Uh,
was.
let's see.
Well, Kevin, congratulations.
Donald wanted to remind us that circuit breakers are unique to the panel manufacturer. Okay, that's good info.
So, yeah, square D is square D. You need to pretty much stay with them, or Siemens is Siemens. But the ideal thing, if you need to replace the circuit breakers, take the old one with you and take it down to the big box store and see what they've got.
Mm-hmm. Stephanie's asked a lot of good questions. Is it safe to plug a travel trailer into a house with a 30 amp household 110 adapter?
Okay, Stephanie, let's look at that. Now, that adapter that you're talking about there is 30 amps on one end, right? Because that's what your plug's going to plug into. Your power cord's going to plug into. On the other end, it plugs into a receptacle. Just remember that 120 volt receptacle is 15 amps. So here again, just like we were talking about earlier about, remember the Class C, I think that Debbie was talking about. Here you're faced with a situation to where you have a power cord that has the capability of handling 30 amps, but the receptacle you're plugging in, because that adapter only has the capability of 1800 because it's a 15 amp, okay? So what that means is no air conditioners. Now I've had people say, oh, I can run my air conditioner. Yes, you can, but just remember what happens is when that air conditioner kicks on, it pulls a lot of power, and so what will take place is that power cord will begin to start getting warmer and warmer, and then pretty soon you're $1,200 in the hole putting a new air conditioner on. So when you plug that power cord into that adapter and plug that adapter into the receptacle, there are things that you can operate in that RV. You can run the heating element for the refrigerator. You could run the heating element for the water heater. You probably could run the microwave, but you can't run them all at the same time. So there's some limitations. You just have to be careful what you do with it. And just remember, that adapter is only going to give you 1,800 watts. So keep that in mind. You may have to flip some of that equipment over and look at it and see what it pulls, okay? Otherwise, you're going to end up with those burned wiring that we saw in the circuit breaker panel box earlier.
All right, here's an interesting question from John. John says, it'll be a number of years before we can full-time and use most of the course information with regularity. Is it better to wait and take the course when we are closer to using the course information, or take it now where it might be 10 to 15 or 5 to 10 years until it's used outside of my trailer? Now, I guess my question would be for John, is he RVing now? Does he have an RV? Is he going to buy one before then, etc.?
You know what, John? What I find is that if you're living in one, education, keeps you out of trouble, keeps you out of the service department. And nobody says that you need to move on to maybe the level 2 type of inspection work, but knowing what you've got will keep you, that 80%, keep you out of the shop. And trust me, I've been a service manager. I know what this is all about, but I'm here to tell you so much of the stuff we used to have to come in the shop didn't need to be there, because if the people just known how to do it, they could have taken care of it themselves. And that's what I'm going to encourage you. So like Mr. Anderson said, if you're living in a unit now, or you have a unit, even if you're just using it part-time, I'm going to encourage, get some education. Yeah, because that's golden, because that keeps you out of trouble and makes you a better consumer. But the big thing is that as you're out buzzing around, you're staying in these campgrounds, you're going to encounter some people that are really going to need some help. And your knowledge may make the difference for them. So keep that in mind, because, here in our world, we got to be paying it forward, because what goes around comes around, right? And so I'm going to encourage you that if you're living in one or you have one, to take a look at getting you some education, because it'll pay off for you.
Of course, the other side of that, Mr. Cooper, also is we've had individuals take this course just to educate themselves to become better consumers to move into the purchasing process. So as they're looking at buying an RV, and especially if they're moving into the pre-owned market, especially, as I think you mentioned, it gets them out of the emotional zone and gets them into the understanding zone.
Who was this? Was it Sandy? Well, I can't remember what her last name was. She came to our class, And man, I mean, this woman, she was a bulldog. She jumped right in because she wanted to learn, you know. And she wrote us back a little later. She'd gone shopping with her son to buy an RV. And finally the salesman, I guess, got fed up with her, kind of challenging him a little bit. He finally just asked her, lady, where did you get this information? And, I think her name was Sandy. I'm trying to remember, because Veda and I were laughing about it, thought, knowing her personality, she was a very pleasant woman, but when she zeroed in on it, by golly, she was intense. And we laughed, thought that poor salesman didn't know what he got a hold of when he met her.
The salesman's worst nightmare is a consumer that's educated, right? All right, well, George says, would it be a good or a bad idea to use Loctite on the circuit panel screws to keep them from vibrating loose?
It would, George. The only thing is I wouldn't get the full Loctite that locks it down, okay? Because what's going to happen is, if you'll notice those bus bars, many of them are made out of aluminum, and so that stuff's going to expand and contract at a different rate, and you may still need to go in there and tweak a little bit, but that Loctite, you're right, would make a difference. But I just wouldn't get the stuff that sets it hard, okay, because you know there's different levels of it, and you're right, it would help. Of course, we've got to make sure that the Loctite doesn't get in between the screw and the wire, create an insulation. So, but no, you're on the right path, sure are.
All right, Charles asks the question, how extensive is the online class, and is there an option to get live questions answered?
Charles, the online class that we're looking at there is, it's a lot of knowledge coming at you. We've got some exercises for you to do, but just keep in mind, you know, we can help you with some questions, but unfortunately, you know, you may be asking a question and we may be in the middle of a class, so we couldn't always get back with you. And so I want to make sure everybody understands that we try to support it as best we can, but sometimes we can't get right back to you. Lady E's always, you know, pulling me aside and say, hey, I've got these 3 emails. I need you to give me some answers so I can get back with them. So I try to do that, but you don't understand that sometimes sitting in the classroom, somebody will say something and maybe it sparks another question, or maybe somebody says something in the classroom that will answer your question. And so I just find the live thing works better. Besides, most of us are hands-on learners. You know, we like to get our hands on it, and I always talk to everybody about, hey, you know, it's because of who our forefathers were. We were craftsmen, we were tradesmen, and so it's in our blood, it's in our gene pool. And so if you can come do the live, I think you'll own more of the information when you finish, if that's the way to say it, okay? I really would.
All right, here's a little follow-up from Dale on what we were talking about with the EMS systems earlier. It says, I've had the Hertz Air 2 at one campground every morning around 7 a.m. Turned out it was an issue from the power plant who was supplying power to the RV park.
Wow.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Wonder how big that power plant was, you know?
So the power plant
had all kinds of horror stories. Yeah.
Had a little burp every morning at 7 a.m. Sounded like. Good.
Usually the public utility commissions for the states step in on that situation and kind of straighten that out real quick, you know?
Well, Mr. Cooper, we are at 2 hours and at the end of the list of questions. And you did a phenomenal job. Phenomenal job. And I want to, one last time here, I want to invite everyone that has been with us on this presentation, and I thank you for hanging in there with us. And I believe just from the kudos that you've received here, Mr. Cooper, we've provided a lot of great information, but there's a lot more information that can be obtained, and that's by attending one of the 5-day hands-on RV maintenance courses. You can visit www.rvtechcourse.com and see the entire list of all the locations where the courses are going to be offered. You can take advantage of the 3 different options to purchase your registration right there on that page and get signed up. And we do limit the classes to, we like to see in the range of no more than 20 in a class. And so we encourage you to, if you're interested, get signed up. go ahead and take action, even if it's for one in the fall that you see listed. Go ahead and get it in your plans and get it on your calendar, so it's going to be part of your 2017. So with that said, very last slide is just a little refresher, Mr. Cooper, of the Training Triad. And if you pop forward to that one, you'll see that this is all about becoming the master of your own RV, and also learning how you can pass it forward by being able to provide help to those in need with their RVs, and then possibly even taking it to that third level where you could develop your own RV inspection business and become an RV inspector. So with that said, Mr. Cooper, any last final words before we finish up?
No, sir. I just want to bid everyone goodbye and thank you for your time this afternoon. You know, this has been I like to say, it's been a time where we spent some time together, but it's been a good day. So thank you so much.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much. You will have this presentation available to you in recorded format. That will be available to you. Probably be in your mailbox inbox tomorrow morning fairly early, and you can look for it there. We encourage you to share it with friends, and we will see you another day and hopefully have a chance to say hello out there on the highways and the byways. Thank you, everyone.